but just for you and I, the idea of who we are is connected to our faith and how we are loved by God through Jesus. That's the value. That's
right.
the label. Welcome to With You Podcast,
where we explore relationships and life transitions.
I'm David.
And I'm Tara.
And we get to talk to each other again.
Here we are again.
Yeah, I want to kind of check in. What have you been up to this last week?
Same thing you've been up to.
We've been hanging out together.
Yeah, it's January. It's Chicago.
It's been cold. Like, I like it chilly, but it's been cold.
I know. So this is always the time of year that I say we really should hibernate as humans.
Yeah.
I feel like nature tells us that things should shut down.
Yeah.
People should go underground, under their blankets, inside their tree trunk, whatever they do, and just hide.
How's that been going for you? How's your hibernating?
There's no hiding for me. No hiding.
You've been super busy.
Yeah. So have you.
Yeah, I know. And we've been busy together too. I mean, it was fun. This Saturday, we got to work together.
It's kind of a new thing for us. You have been speaking a lot sort of over the years on your own.
Yeah.
And that's new for us to do together.
Yeah.
So we got to speak at a church for sort of a half-day workshop on parenting.
Yeah, and it covered the gamut. We had parents that had newborns, some that they were in utero there.
Well, yeah, there was someone who was pregnant, and we had experienced grandparents and everything in between.
Yeah.
That was really cool.
It was a challenge. It's a challenge to address all of that.
How do you think we did?
I think we did really well. Well, and I shouldn't say I'm surprised, but I am surprised.
It's a growing edge for you to have me also talking, because you have your own pace.
Yeah.
And you can fill space very easily.
When I teach, I get to either facilitate discussion but I'm in charge of the room. And then when we're there together, we're in charge of the room.
Yeah. And then we have to go back and forth. And same thing when I'm teaching childbirth.
Yeah.
I just talk nonstop for a few hours, and I have my own kind of script not script, but I just have my topics in my head, and I go from one to the other, and I know what I want to say. And
yeah. And together, we both have different things in our head.
Probably.
Yeah. And we have to navigate that. But all that to say, that's why I was surprised, because it was a beautiful dance, I thought.
Well, I'd love to hear from the people who actually...
No, let's just you and I
we're in the audience.
It was a beautiful dance.
I think so. I felt...
The rhythm was good.
Balanced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we didn't, because like when we first started doing, like a year ago when we started doing workshops, you would have each of us responsible for a slide, and it would be really structured. It was
more structured, but I think we have to start out, because I think the very first time we did it, where there was a lot of you, me.
Yeah. It was like Night at the Roxbury, this SNL skit where it's like,
So I think we kind of have gotten the balance down better, and it was fun.
Yeah,
it was fun to do together. We were both like wiped out afterwards.
Yeah, well,
it's
a lot of work.
Yeah, we put a lot out there, and then I think our biggest problem with the last several workshops we've done is that I don't think we have enough material, and we end up having way too much to actually fit in the time that we have, because we have so much we want to share.
Yeah.
So that's what we're figuring out.
Yeah. So if you want us, we're willing to continue to practice and try. But yeah, it was. Yeah, no, we do.
Fun. Like, honestly, if people are listening and they want us to come we do couples workshops, we do parenting workshops, and that's probably about it.
That's enough.
And topics within that. We're doing one in Romania on conflict, and
a professional one on burnout, and that happens for birth workers as well as mental health professionals. Mm-hmm. And so, you can find out about us on our webpage. So that's the good place. But I like what we're going to talk about today. Let's pivot to today in our conversation.
I think when we've talked about what do we want to just chat about on the podcast, this has come up a few times because I don't know, it just comes up in daily life. So we're going to talk about labels.
Yeah. Labels.
Labels.
Not like the kind you put on your lunch to say
not
this
like
is
a name
David's.
tag, not like
name tags.
like a washing instructions in your clothing.
This is labels that we call each other, labels that we give each other. And it's been interesting because I think it's come up both in our conversations, it's come up in churches we've been at. And of course, in mental health professionals, there's always a diagnosis, and that's a type of label. And so I have a strong reaction to labels in an interesting way.
Yeah, well, especially because in your field, there's a lot of testing that people will do to put themselves in personality categories or
or diagnoses or there's
not
lots
like
of
official diagnoses when you're talking about lay people who do like personality test or like
you take those online tests to see what kind of animal you are or what kind of superhero you are.
In between diagnosis and animal, somewhere in the middle where it's more like what kind of employee will you be? What's your personality and how well will it fit with others and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
People do a lot of the
Myers-Briggs,
Enneagram. So that's where it comes up for you a lot because a lot of people in some of our circles are very involved with Enneagram, and they always assume that you will be because it's kind of about like, who are you?
Yeah.
How can we understand each other?
Yeah.
And they don't get the reaction from you that they're hoping for.
No, they say, what number are you? And I'm like, I think 42.
Or they say, you're such a 7 or a 2 or whatever. And we both don't understand that language.
No, we have not drank that Kool-Aid. and
so tell us about your feelings and why.
Yeah, well, I feel strongly. and I think you have to kind of scope out a little bit first in that a marriage and family therapist, we think about the relationship. We don't necessarily think about the individual. It's what's happening in the relationship that drives the experience of the individual. Most of these labeling psychology type of things is what's going on with the individual. So it makes a lot of sense of this is who you are. This is what's going on for you. I'm interested in the space between. So even naming labels and assessment and diagnosis kind of works towards a certain way of thinking that I would say antithetical to. And so when people at church are like, or we're in a small group and they're like, oh, the Enneagram, David. I'm like, I get a shudder. And I try to be nice. But I found I'm less and less nice around that because I feel that it serves a purpose. The whole point is, and we talked with our kids about this today, of just kind of asking them, it classifies you, it puts you in a group. And so there's this kind of shorthand of, if you're an 8, I don't even know what an 8 is, but if you're an 8, everybody kind of has an idea of who you are. Now, I would say the problem of that is you're not curious. So like,
think you understand.
Yeah, you're an 8,
person.
so I'm going to respond to you as an 8. And I think there's probably more difference between 8s than between 8s and 7s.
Oh,
yeah,
maybe.
I don't know. It's just one number, but so that's kind of what gets me going.
I think there's some limitations.
Yeah, and the propensity is it's going to other you. Right. So like, I'm not curious about you, Tara. I'm like, oh, you're a 2. And so then I can just respond to you as a 2. And I don't have to be curious about what's unique about you, how you kind of explore the world.
Well, and I think the people who love it would say it is because they're curious and it helps them, understand more about, I know you're already twitching.
I'm going to lean heavily into my sipping to cause a break, but no.
So the intention is for some understanding of people's motivations and, how they might behave and how well that might jive with somebody in a different category. But there's so much variety in humans.
Yeah.
We can't possibly all fit into this short list of categories.
And I think it can lead, it's not this way, but it can lead this way into all sorts of isms, right? Or all sorts of othering that I'll treat you as a thing rather than a person. Yeah. And so I think there's a continuum. You're right. I think people are curious, but they're curious to figure you out rather than spend time with you.
Frustrating when I was younger and you would sometimes take those tests, like quizzes that would then put you in some sort of category. I almost always was like in between.
Yeah.
something. So I was never extreme. So I never felt, so then I was disappointed. I'm like, I'm not like all the whatevers,
Yeah.
I'm kind of like on the border
You don't
of
fit.
everything.
Yeah.
I don't fit easily. And it's self-reported, right? It's how you answer
Yeah.
those questions. And
Yeah.
sometimes you kind of know what they're looking for, or you're like, well, today I feel this way. Tomorrow I might answer that differently.
Yeah. How do you feel about those things? So I've shared that I despise them with the burning passion of the hot sun.
And you're talking mostly about like personality tests, like those kinds of
Myers-Briggs,
labels.
Enneagram, thinking about colors or however you classify people. And again, it's shorthand. I understand it's shorthand. Like in the business world, I want to develop a team and I need a shorthand of how is that team going to fit together.
Yeah.
It's functional.
Yeah.
But I think to the extent that people are like asking you your number and trying to figure out how to deal with you based on that number, or like I would say the Myers-Briggs, I would always tell people I'm ESPN.
Right.
Is my Myers-Briggs. And they're like, wait,
there
what?
isn't something close to that.
That's
but
not
yeah.
right. But it's, I want that space to play relationally. And so the shorthand is helpful for immediate kind of team building, but then going deep, there needs to be something else.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the reaction is that labels have been used in very dangerous ways in human history, right?
Yes.
Like we can think of a lot of ways that labels have been used to really discriminate against people and even exterminate people. Like
we're on the 80th anniversary of Auschwitz recently. And so,
So when you think of the gold stars and the numbers and the so many ways in history that we've wanted to categorize the people that, in tiers of worth and things, that's scary.
Yeah. How did, because you did have a label growing up.
What label?
Missionary kid.
Well, we've got a lot of labels like that, I guess.
Yeah, but that is a grouping to explain how you're different than, say, a normal kid.
Quarterback.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's what we asked our kids today, thinking about, I'd like to hear it from their perspective, from a different generation of what do you think of labels and how do your peers use labels? And they had a lot of interesting things to say.
I'm not going to lie. I didn't understand half of what they said.
Well, their first thought was kind of those high school labels, like people kind of categorize, you're a jock or you're a nerd or you're a,
let's just go back to the 80s. Burnout. I mean, we had.
And there's some way that people like to identify with a group of people that are sort of like them, like I fit here or I fit here. Yeah. And so those labels can be given to you by society or whoever, or they can be self-imposed or self-described or chosen or whatever. I think there's different ways they come about. And I think in that middle school, high school, I think that's when kids are really trying to try those on and figure that out.
And I think it's fine to try them on. It's dangerous to get pigeonholed and kind of stuck there. So like in middle school, high school, what were your identifying labels? How did
personally?
How did you identify, or how were you identified by your peer group?
I mean, probably with the smart kids. I was like, the top 10% in honor society and student council, and I was an overachiever for sure, but just super involved. So I was in a lot of things though. Like nobody said she's in drama, she's a drama kid, or she's a, because I was spread so wide in the things I was trying everything.
Well, and we talked about you were a floater. That's not really a nice term, but you kind of floated between groups, which is interesting because as you're talking, you're like, and when I take the tests, I'm right in the middle. So there's this kind of mapping on of the middle.
I have serious FOMO, fear of missing out. I don't like to be only in one place and miss what's going on everywhere else. I think it stems, seriously, I'm just interested in a lot of things.
Well, and I think that's what the kids were leaning into too, of as you have those descriptors, it helps you affiliate with a group, and you wanted to affiliate with lots of groups. How do you do that if labels are being given?
Well, and if I maybe unconsciously, I felt like if this is all you have, and then they turn on you or you lose it or something, and then you've lost everything.
Yeah.
Because in high school, I think there's partly a survival instinct of like attach yourself to a group where you're going to belong and you'll have a place.
Yeah.
But I think I always felt like I didn't really belong to anything. So I belonged to a lot of things.
Yeah.
Those might have been part of it.
Yeah.
But I don't think I ever had a label that I really fit in one that I lived into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as we talked with our kids, there's a lot of that going on now. So there's the names like we grew up with. It was jock, nerd, burnout,
for us,
preppy,
stoner, preppy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think parents do that with their kids. We label our kids, like whether it's kind of comically or whatever, but like, oh, this is my smart one, my athletic one, my funny one. And then I think, don't you think people can live into that?
Yeah.
Like if you give them that, I mean, I talk a lot about language, especially from an early age and self-fulfilling prophecy. But if, like, I feel like, our daughter Annika is an artist. And I think partly we leaned into that from the time she was young and interested in drawing and painting. We're like, you are an artist. And she fully lived into and is still fully living into that.
Yeah.
And I think
I want to tell her she's an entrepreneur and banker.
But that affirmation from society can help make those labels stick.
Yeah.
And then the actual identity come through.
Well, and it's not all bad because there's a sense of then she participates in art communities and kind of gets along with people. It
doesn't have to be bad at all.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, labels, right?
Yeah.
So, but there's also parenting, like we were talking this weekend, of kids that you're like, oh, this is my troubled child.
Right.
Or this is my strong-willed child.
Yeah.
And we worked really hard, at least on that level, of challenging ourselves, of not wanting to create a narrative that our child could live into. There's one especially.
There's one that inspired me
listening to this.
That inspired me to buy the book called Raising Your Spirited Child. Yeah, because that language matters.
Yeah. And it could easily have been troublemaker or strong-willed or opinionated or defiant, right? And we use those words, those labels, to kind of describe a behavior. But if we're not careful, it becomes an identity. And then they respond to that of like, I guess this is how everybody sees me, so how I have to react. And we respond to that of, I don't give the benefit of the doubt. I just go right to, if there's a moment, it's like, oh, this is who you are.
Right. And then it just confirms to me that's who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when we asked our kids, we had a conversation about this, I thought it was really interesting. A lot of stuff they said about their kind of peer group. And we were asking them, why do you think people are drawn to labels or that they're looking? And they said, people, especially what did they say? The early teens or whatever, everybody would take those online quizzes.
Yeah. They said Reddit.
Did they say Reddit or?
This is where all of a sudden I started to kind of glaze over. But they would do online quizzes.
And we're like, why do people want to do that? And I said, I think people really are trying to figure out who they are and where they fit, trying to figure out, where they belong. But also, they said a lot of the college students that they were in class with, there was a big thing for sort of exploring what denomination you might, because a lot of the kids that come to Wheaton
like
College
10s and 20s
have grown up in one church or
church denominations.
Church denominations. Because in the U.S., it's not the same. In Europe, I think there's fewer numbers of denominational churches. We have a lot to choose from, and so I think it's confusing, especially for young people, to figure out, well, what is the difference between all these Christians and why are we in these different categories and why are we separate? And wait, maybe I belong in a different one. And so they said a lot of their peers were kind of really obsessed with figuring out which denomination beliefs and things fit
Yeah.
them and who they were.
Well, it makes me think of Piaget actually as we're talking. I didn't plan on this, but let's have a little quick Piaget lecture.
All right, let's do it.
So Piaget talked a lot about classifications, and he was super smart. He had his first article when he was like a preteen. He got published on the phylum of mollusks, and his dad ran a museum, kind of natural history museum. So he had all of this kind of zoology, biology, where he was classifying things. And he started to realize kids think in certain ways and kind of classifying. And the way they think about is they develop a scheme. They develop a kind of idea or a label. Like, this is a dog. So I think about when we were driving to Colorado, when the kids were little, they labeled animals with 4 legs as a dog. And we were driving through the plains, and there are a bunch of cattle, longhorn cattle. And our kids would be like, "Oh, doggies." And I'm like,
I don't remember that.
Oh, yeah. And I was like, what's wrong with them? But because they had only a limited experience of classification of that.
Yeah.
And as you get more and more experience, hopefully you have finer and finer classification. And so, like, who knew? Our daughter-in-law, Abigail, can tell you how many types of dogs there are.
Yeah, all the breeds. And
I think there's dogs and not dogs. I'm very basic in my schema there. But the idea is we're always looking to make meaning and place people in something that then we can comprehend. And I think that's helpful developmentally, but we need to get to a point where we're kind of expanding and experiencing you as a unique, full human from the culture, the background, the faith that you have, and being able to act that way rather than, oh, I know you. Because I think the college students are looking for
they want to say, oh, I'm an Episcopalian, or
Yeah.
I'm an Anglican, I'm a Baptist, whatever. And that means something to people. And
yeah. I challenge those labels all the time. People will say something and I'm like, I'm not sure what that means. And they look at me like I fell down and hit my head. But I think a lot of times even in language, we use things assuming you and I are going to have the same agreement of whatever that word is. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. And let's play with it. It drives people crazy.
Well, because then they have to articulate it. Why is it that you identify with that?
Yeah.
What does that mean to you? Because we can't assume it means the same thing to me and you.
Yeah. So this classification, I think, is biological, but I think it's also basic that we can get stuck there and be dehumanizing on some level. I know that's a strong word, but
but it can go that far.
Yeah. And it happens. I mean, the kids were also talking about classification, identity, in terms of just all the different ways to try to identify myself and providing labels that then I have a unique identity that I can be part of a group. And I think that's true too. I mean, we've seen it in the U.S. politics of evangelical. What does that mean? That label.
Yeah, and that means Christian. A lot of different things.
It does.
To a lot of different people.
But we kind of want to just put it into one big clump and then we can deal with that rather than the uniqueness of there's probably more difference.
Yeah. Well, I guess when you say that too, it's a simplification process, right? Too, of being able to group things.
Yeah.
And it's partly what we do in math. It's what kids do from the time they're little. They want to classify the dinosaurs and put the red blocks and the blue blocks in different bins. And, it's kind of part of our human nature to sort of sort and classify, but it is very different and tricky when it comes to humans and labels and like how sticky is that label?
Yeah.
Like, does it have to live with you your whole life, or do we move and grow and change, and or everybody within that same classification, a lot of different people?
Yeah. Oh, and you give yourself a label. Like, I think about you, you're like, I'm not really a speaker. When we first started doing this. And now I look at you and you've grown into an amazing articulate speaker that I love just listening to. But it was like, I think that you didn't have confidence in speaking. And so then the label kind of creates a trajectory of like, I'm not good at that. So that's not who I am. So I don't do it. And it continues a trajectory versus challenge it, try it once. And
that reminds me of what I told Annika too in her art, because this is not as much of a label as much as our own self, I don't know, identity sort of words that we use. And Annika, when she would be doing art, she would say, I can't do people. I can't draw people. And I said, no, that's not a thing you say. You don't say, I can't. You say, I'm working on. I'm getting better at. Because do you want to? She's like, oh, yeah. If I'm an artist, like I want to be able to do people, but I can't. I'm just not that artist. I can do nature.
Yeah.
Well, if you say can't, you've already ruled it out. You've put yourself there.
Yeah.
You can say, I'm improving at my skills on drawing people. And she did. And her senior art project was all portraits of people.
Really?
In front. Really? You were there. Remember?
I do remember.
But just thinking about how much she grew into that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that it came from my encouragement, but I'm just saying we have our support and words around people have some power.
Yeah.
For good or for ill.
And, and the limiting. I know even in our talk, we kind of go through our outline when we're presenting, and there is a bullet point that we talked about for a while.
I'm losing my headphones. Excuse me. Just some adjusting.
Yeah. So if you just shave your head, you wouldn't have that problem. Mine stick right there. When we were doing the bullet points, there was one summary bullet point where it's, I'm trying my best. And we had a bit of a discussion about that or I'm doing my best. And we kind of then played around with it while I'm trying, because doing your best, that even that languaging says, here's the best. And it's like, well, yes, but we want to look at the trying part, not the
effort, not
part.
the outcome.
And so that's a different type of labeling, and you did that with Annika, of just like, be careful of what you say about yourself and how you talk about yourself.
Right. Because you'll live up or down to it.
Well, and I think people do that. I think they kind of describe themselves in a certain way to be helpful, but it limits them, and I want to free people up. And I guess that's why I get so reactive. And
because you're like, that's not all I am. You can't make me a 7.
But
people do that with astrology too. Like I've heard people say that out there. So it's astrology, right? I'm saying the right thing. It's not astronomy.
No, those are stars and planets. Astrology
Astrologists,
is,
where your signs, your birth signs. So, well, she and I are both Capricorns, so and I don't know what that means either. But some people really hold tight to those categories. It means I get along with this person, or I see eye to eye with this person.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's like, when you're born, this is your personality, and even personality. So personality tests of, I think about our mothers, hi moms, where they say they're not really extroverted, they're introverted.
There's another label.
Right.
Like, are you extroverted?
There's no way
they
our
both have
are
called
introverted.
themselves introverts,
No.
and everybody laughs really hard.
I don't believe in labels, but you both are extroverts.
Their reasoning is that they both like to be alone occasionally. That's not how it works.
No, but even that label, I think it's helpful to kind of go, oh, where do I get energy from? I get energy from people. I get energy from time alone. But that can look very different across the spectrum of energy from people, energy alone.
Yeah.
And so, yes, they might like alone time, and they can label themselves that way, but it's
but they
not,
clearly get wound up and energized by being around people. It's life-giving for them.
I think, are there times, parenting, dealing with birth, that not diagnosis, labels are important? I need help because
I could go. You don't want to open that can of worms, because I could go crazy on labels in the birth world when I think about it. Just only in the medical world as a whole, because it has to be. I'm sure for medical professionals they have to know what they're working with, and diagnosis is part of knowing what the problem is that you're working with, or the risk,
to inform treatment.
Right, and it can be passed on through a chart to other people that need to treat you or whatever. But it can be super limiting and anxiety producing and all of that stuff too, for pregnant people that I work with who are diagnosed as, a favorite is advanced maternal age or geriatric, because they had their 35th birthday.
Ooh.
They're now geriatric. pregnant person.
Wow.
That's a fun one.
Yeah.
And then automatically, not even taking into account their personal unique health status, they're now, even if they already went through half their pregnancy as a 34-year-old, and now they turn 35, and now they have to have all this extra testing, and they're put in a different risk category because that's where that label starts.
Just because they
crossed that birthday. So there's a lot of them like that.
Yeah.
That then create its own problem, because then they're anxious every time they go into their visit, because I'm over 35 and this pregnancy is now dangerous, and so naturally their blood pressure goes higher, and it just sort of can spiral into other things. And now I'm PIH, I'm pregnancy induced hypertension, and I might be preeclamptic, and I'm, and it just, there's a lot.
Yeah. So there's this tension of the diagnosis leads to a course of treatment. So it's helpful to have a really good diagnosis, but it also, you can live into that if it's not diagnosed well. So I think that's where just loose labels and us playing with Enneagrams and that can be problematic, because it leads to living into that. But it can be in the mental health field too, because I'll get someone coming in and I see their medical file and they've had a smorgasbord of diagnoses, because once you have a label, it stays with you. And so even when labels are competing, you're looking at that and it starts to become a reality, and you have to be very careful. It needs to inform treatment, but we also have to use critical thinking,
right,
to see, okay, I need to be thinking about this. So maybe I need to be thinking about the areas of geriatric pregnancy for a 35-year-old. But then, is there supporting data to feed into that? Or am I just going, this hits this milestone, so we're going to treat it this way?
Right. Yeah. And if you want to go into the mental health area,
I do.
Like there's a lot of lay diagnosing going on, especially, and that's one thing our kids mentioned was that it's very trendy to call yourself, I saw a video on TikTok about somebody who has ADHD, and I think I'm like that person. So I now have ADHD, or I'm autistic, or I'm whatever it is that they identify with the behavior that they see in a video or in something. So there's a lot of that being flung around that I don't know what, the reason is for that, except that there's so much information accessible now to people in a young age where they're kind of identifying with things. So they may be calling themselves something and identifying with something that's not an actual medical diagnosis.
No, and I want to challenge people, and myself included, because you helped me with this, of the difference between the essence of somebody. And I think sometimes a label can be you are depressed. You're a depressed person. That's a statement of your essence and worth, versus there's depressive symptoms, there's depressive things you're doing that
Start
we
with
need
person.
to
You
address
are
that.
a person.
You are a person. You are a child
symptoms.
Of God. You are loved. No matter what you do, it won't affect how you're loved. That is core, versus I think it becomes core of I am depressed, or I am a depressed person, or I am, I just use depression because it's easier to talk about, but we could say, I'm neurodivergent, which is helpful because there can be accommodations, there can be things, and it can be limiting because it's saying this is who I am, and we're more than labels. We're more than diagnoses. And this is really what stirs me up, because I think we can do that in our parenting too. And this is where you help me out, because sometimes I'm like, what's wrong with you? I would say to the children, and you would say,
do you really think something's wrong with them?
And emotionally, I'd want to say, yes, I do. But in reality, no, but the language matters.
Yeah.
And I was labeling them. There's something wrong with you. Versus that behavior is not okay.
Yeah.
I see that same classification for labels. I'm getting excited. I can't believe it's so late at night. I'm ready to fight, because it can dehumanize.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, and I see that going around too with the way people characterize people who they're not getting along well with, and they're giving these blanket sort of words like narcissism and toxic and like things like that can really just put somebody into a very tight box.
Yeah. Well, we're watching a TV series. Right? Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It's a show where it started in the UK, and it's where
we watch a lot of UK based shows.
We do.
Yeah. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah. Maybe we should label ourselves as Anglophiles. But so we're watching this show, and it's called The Traitors. And I'm not recommending you watch it.
Yeah, I didn't think you were going to name that.
Yeah, well,
I thought you were going to dance around that.
I was thinking about it, and then I'm just like, well, because it's about how we classify people, and are you faithful or are you a traitor? And I'm going to either try to have an unbiased view of like, are you doing faithful things or traitorous things, versus other people are just like, you're breathing funny, you must be a traitor. And it's fascinating because I think this labeling, you can see it played out in this of like, what do we look for? If I say you're a narcissist, I'm going to be looking for things to confirm that confirmation bias, that confirm this is who you are.
Right. Right. It's a very interesting social experiment to watch these kinds of shows that push people to form alliances and betray. And I find it fascinating and terrifying because watching that, I'm like, no way. You couldn't pay me enough to go on a show like that. The social stress
pay whatever just to see.
To see me, I'd be out. I'd be kicked out in the first round.
I don't know.
Like, I don't know. That it seems stressful because, as you said, they're analyzing each other's behavior. They're trying to decide who fits together and who's on the outside. And
but let's think about your label.
We all just be together.
You're in that middle space. You're able to go with everyone. I think that. See, I'm labeling you.
Right? I know. I am kind of an under the radar person. You know, like when I was a kid.
I would totally be murdered right away.
You'd be out there, but that might be your strength. Like you just say what you think. When we played Capture the Flag when I was a kid.
What's Capture the Flag?
So let me see if I can remember how. I mean, basically, one group tries to steal the flag from the other's territory. So you have to. There's a flag on either end. Just imagine it's a football field, but there's usually trees or obstacles in between that you can hide between.
Okay.
And so there's a red team and a blue team, let's just say.
Okay.
And each team has a flag. And the blue team has to steal the red. You just have to get past their people or in their defenses, capture their flag, and then you win.
Okay.
You just have to capture the other team's flag.
How hard is that?
So there's some people that would be very straightforward and just barrel down the middle.
Yeah.
I was always sneaking around the outside. I was so scared of getting caught or because if you get captured by the other team, you're put in a holding cell or something.
Tortured?
I don't know. The unknown is terrifying. So I would just go from tree to tree, hiding.
Did you ever get the flag?
Once or twice, but I was usually out of like the really hot action that was going on in the middle.
And just kind of slinking.
I never got captured. I didn't get captured.
No.
But I didn't always make it to glory either.
Well, you survived.
I survived. That was the name of the game for me. I didn't want to be in jail.
There's all sorts of different ways to approach that. And our person, like what we see as our strength. So I think a labeling would say our personality dictates our behavior. I would say you've learned through a lot of experiences in life, this is the safest way, which is different. One is a biological predisposition that this is who you are. And I think there are things that make us different from each other, regardless of the label, gender, identity, all of that, there's uniqueness to us. But there's also the shaping. So like your experience on the mission field and living internationally, and you've learned to be careful because you don't know what the heck is going on.
Or I do know, and it's scary.
Or you do know, and it's scary.
Yeah. So of course it's a mix, right? There's who we were born as unique people with some predispositions for things and personality leanings and stuff. And then there's the way we're shaped by the world and our family and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's fascinating how even our 4 kids who grew up with seemingly kind of the same influences and genes have very big differences.
Yeah, it's so annoying. I would love to have parenting be you do one thing and it's the right thing and it just works for all your children.
Yeah.
And it
It'd be
doesn't.
so boring if they were little robots that came out all the same, though.
Yeah, yeah, probably. It does make life interesting.
It does.
And so we have this, we've had these things that we've been thinking about in terms of labels, language, and you can see even as we talk, I've been listening to us as we talk, and we lean into the edge of labels. I think it's just
well,
natural.
you didn't reveal any labels you'd been given that you either leaned into or that you tried to work away from.
Yes, I believe I was charming. Do you want to help? Do you want to help? That's a label, man. That guy is charming.
Okay,
I think in high school I navigated the loss of my sister and grief in my own life by excelling. And excelling athletically. So I leaned into the popular.
So you were a jock.
Yeah, I probably would say.
You would own that label in high school.
I was athletic.
And did you want that label?
Yeah, I think it fed a need. So it was like, oh, I got attention, and people focused on that and didn't focus on other things. And so on some level, it was a distraction from the pain that I was experiencing. So I could just kind of thrive in that, and being born in a family where, as the first boy born, leaning into that of trying to focus on the being unique and privileged.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, thinking later in life what labels you might have had.
Because a professor would not be a label that I would have.
We still kind of laugh when we think about like what you thought you would be when you were an undergrad and what you've done now. Like, you wouldn't have thought Fulbright scholar and
No, I probably wouldn't even be able to spell that back in high school.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I didn't think of myself and wasn't labeled an academic or an intellectual. I was just fun time friend. and didn't really lean into that.
Yeah.
And now it's
And
strange.
you still wouldn't label yourself that way. Like, you would fit into categories with similar people who have similar roles, but I wouldn't say you define yourself by some of those labels.
No, I don't. I wake up every morning going, what am I doing? Like, how did this happen? And
well, life is interesting. We can be lots of things.
it is. And I think it helps that I don't lean into that, because then I can have interesting spaces in my work, because I think sometimes the label limits the creativity. So I was just talking with someone, they're like, you're one of the more entrepreneurial faculty. And that's a nice way to say, you're not the typical intellectual.
You're all over the place.
I'm all over the place.
Well, you're creating new
doing
things.
Yeah.
I think that's what that means.
Yeah. And so looking back of it, you could easily just go, oh, this is who I am. And so then this is the path I have to follow. Fortunately, and for me, it was having people in my life that would speak into maybe the thinner identities. So there's the major stories or the thick stories, and then there's these other smaller minor parts, and they would speak into that of, have you thought about that? Or why don't you try this? That allowed for new possibilities. And if it was just labels, just the dominant labels, I think it'd be a very different life. So that's been important to me.
Yeah.
And you've done that. Your dad's done that, of breaking. We talk about it as breaking patterns, but I think breaking patterns are breaking out of labels.
Yeah.
Or expectations.
Expectations. Yeah. Yeah. I think they kind of go hand in hand, don't you think? Like, a label creates expectations.
Yeah. And
vice versa, maybe.
And within that, like, if you think about expectations, the flip side of that can be shame. Like, you're not meeting expectations. Like, guilt is you've done something wrong. Shame is you haven't lived up to expectations. Like, shame on you, David, is like, oh, you're not doing what you should be doing.
Yeah.
versus guilt on you, David. That was not okay, what you did. But you pushed through some of that, the expectations.
I know. You know what? When I think about that, when I feel like I've been given a label, or people think I fit into a certain category, I work really hard to get out of that.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
I know. You don't like me labeling you.
You're right. Yeah, I don't think I've really thought about that about myself before.
Yeah.
But like very intentionally, sometimes I will turn, or I love being underestimated, or I'll just switch the script because I don't like people thinking they understand that I fit right here.
Yeah. You know what that's called?
Not doing well with authority.
Delinquent. So, again, that's not true, but it's
no, because
funny.
I'm also very much, it's weird because I'm also very much a people pleaser.
And rule follower.
Yeah. So that's kind of a strange thing about me. So maybe we're both labeled breakers.
Yeah.
Label rippers, whatever.
And kind of willing to challenge and push the edges. But you do it within a structure and a level of risk tolerance.
Yeah. Our how is a little different.
Oh, yeah. Mine is, let's blow this thing up and see what happens and how we rebuild it. And you're like, we can just remodel it a little bit. And I think that's our difference. But I do think that that's been a strength for us together, is not that we challenge labels, but we're in agreement in how we approach that. I think other couples can live into that and it can be okay. But just for you and I, the idea of who we are is connected to our faith and how we are loved by God through Jesus, that's the value. That's the label.
That is.
Everything else isn't.
Because that's a core identity that never changes. That's where our worth and our value comes from. And so we don't need to get value from fitting in these other categories. Ideally, I mean, we're all human. Yeah. I think we kind of look for belonging in other places, but
I think that you're right. That's the core. There's not a lot of space for the other ones because that is central. The other ones we can play with, and it's just like, what does that look like connected to this idea of child
the way
of God?
Those things work is just, how is that a different way to express my identity and share what I know about the way God loves me and others.
Yeah. And it does then inform how we love others, of like, if that's central and if I'm loved unconditionally, then there's
so
freedom.
Are you.
And you, right? Yeah, and you're loved unconditionally.
Yeah, but I mean, just extending that to everybody else changes everything too.
And it moves us from, oh, this is how you are, to, well, no matter what you do, and I try to communicate this to my students, and hopefully my kids and you, of like, no matter what you do won't change how I love you. There may be consequences. It may hurt. All of those things can be true. And that core is, your value isn't connected to what you do, which I would also say in this case, your value is not connected to the label that you either put on yourself or others put on you.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end.
All right. Well, we are podcasters, right? That's the label. And we'd love to hear from you. So reach out, like, subscribe. I forget all the words we're supposed to say here.
Well, we do love feedback. So if you are listening, we would love a review or just a note via email. That'll be in the show notes.
You want to fight about Enneagrams?
To help us find other people, and just so that we know that we're not alone.
That's right. Have a good evening.